So, I am joined today with the fantastic illustrator Ben Bender, creator of Beorn. Going to ask a few questions.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking this.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So, just as a quick Beorn, Littlest Viking, we're going to talk about. So, Beorn, what was the origin?
It's big. Maybe we should have talked about the questions. So, I always knew that I wanted to do comic strips, and as I've tried to remember where it first kind of came, like the idea first came from, I think it really was like a picture that then led to the story, more than like writing the story and then the picture coming out, you know, instead of having a story and then designing the character for it. I think I was just doodling stuff, and I drew a little kid, and I had it in my head. It was more of just like a barbarian. Because, and I catch a lot of grief for this, Vikings didn't wear those helmets, right? And I know this, so it wasn't a Viking at first, but then as I was writing him and his best friend was a troll, I was like, man, it's got to be a little Viking. And so I came up with the idea that he got his helmet from a comic book. And once I had a reason that he wore the helmet, I was like, okay, he's a Viking. Right? And so it became populated with the Norse myths and folklore and fairy tales and that kind of stuff. But it started as just a little doodle.
And then from that doodle,
then it kind of the stories came out. And initially it was still just like I was writing them as comic strips, so that just real quick, kind of one and done sort of things. But then one strip would lead to another, and I started writing longer stories for it. And the things that, like if I was having him have a bad day or whatever he was distressed about, as I was like, oh, well, what bothered him today? Those things became bigger, more epic things. So it didn't fit within just like a comic strip kind of format. And so for a while I took it where I wanted to do like big full-page comic strips like Crazy Cat or Little Nemo or something like that. But then even then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was like each idea couldn't be wrapped up in a one-page thing, so I needed to move it to comic books.
And when it came to creating the world, was there any surprises that you didn't foresee them coming? Like as you started writing?
As far as like the story elements and things like that.
Like as the world started getting bigger.
Absolutely. And so for me it's fun because I am by no stretch like a Norse historian or anything like that. And so I'm lucky enough to have certain people that I can either get in touch with them and say like, hey man, I've got an idea for Beorn. It's something like this, but I don't know what to do. Is there anything you can think of? And they'll send me things. They'll say like, oh, you should go read this from the sagas, or there was this god that did this, or that kind of stuff. And so I'm constantly getting to fill in things like that. So I get the surprise of that sometimes, but then the other surprise that I get is where if I don't ask someone that I've written a thing that I'm like, well, something like this will happen. And then as I'm reading Norse myths on my own, or some other fairy tale, some Germanic folklore or something, I go, God, that's perfect.
That works.
That's perfect. So like,
that weird synchronicity.
I've shared their names. So for a while I didn't share their names, but like the twins in the story, the two-headed creature, there are, well, I don't want to say too much about who they are. People can go look it up, but there were two characters, Nari and Narfi. And whenever I was learning about them, whenever I was reading about them, there was like this dispute of, was it one person, was it two people? And some of the stories, they very much interact with each other. And other stories, who this person was is called by this name. So sometimes it's like it was one person, sometimes it was two. And so whenever I was reading that, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect for this two-headed creature. Is it one? Is it two? Is it, so things like that were always fun and surprising. And then just as a broad stroke, it's very much that story, that type of story where I often don't feel like I'm kind of creating it. I feel like I'm being told it. That I'll sit down to write something and again, from my outline, I'll know that I need a more specific thing that happens here. And it's like I'm almost sitting down wondering what happens, and then it comes from somewhere, right? That sort of inspiration.
And it's like when you mentioned when you drew them, It was like, here I am.
Yeah, very much.
Are you ready for my adventures?
Right. And so when that happens, wherever that comes from, that sort of inspired storytelling, that's often surprising. Where you're like, oh my gosh, you know, like I don't even know if I wrote that. That was awesome. Like I can't wait to tell this story.
Yeah. So there's a very distinct style to the artwork and the way you draw. What would your influences be growing up, comic book wise?
Yeah. So if I just list them, like biggest are definitely Bill Watterson from Calvin and Hobbes, Jeff Smith from Bone, and then like Hagar the Horrible. So Dick Brown was a big one. Not even so much in aesthetic, but just that sort of like nice inky kind of line. And then as I came back to art, because I stopped drawing when I was a kid, and so I started drawing when I was 30, and I was like the things that I remembered enjoying when I came back to those. It was like I could be more specific, and we were lucky enough because my mom was in the Air Force. The Pogo comics were still running in the comics and the strips, even though they were done running by that point. And so I got to see Walt Kelly, I got to see Pogo, so I loved his brushwork. Yeah, so those are kind of the big ones. Any of those early comic strips were huge influences. And then Jeff Smith with Bone, especially, like, I always loved them in black and white. So solid inking was always a big deal.
There's a very strong influence of European style.
Yeah. So that it's funny because that came very early, but I didn't realize that it came very early. So my mom was in the Air Force and we lived in Germany. And so, and again, I was like 3 to 5, so I was super young, right? And like this was probably before I was drawing even. But you know, I loved watching the Smurfs, read all the Smurfs books. Mom would always have asterisks around all the, you know, the Franco-Belgian kind of comics that were in Germany. And but then, you know, I didn't draw for so long and I moved on. It wasn't until I launched the first Beorn Kickstarter that someone said it. They were like, man, this has a real strong like Van de Zin kind of style. And even that, I was like, what the hell is that? You know, and I went and Googled it. And as soon as I looked it up, it was like that sort of flashback of, oh my gosh, you know, like I did read all, like that is something that I was into. And so now I've made a point of like tracking down people like Franklin and Vidu and Fournier and stuff like that, and like strengthening that influence, seeing things that I go, oh my gosh, I do that. This must have been kind of where that came from.
Because when I first saw your work, that was what instantly stood out to me, because I'm from Scotland. I grew up reading Asterix, Tintin, Lucky Luke, and it had that style, that almost, I don't want to say genre, but that style. So do you have a favourite style when it comes to your art? Is it ink, pencil, paint?
I would have happily done Beorn in black and white, and up until like right before I was going to do the first Kickstarter, I had even kind of put my foot down and was like, I'm going to do this in black and white. And I still have the first 2 images that I painted, because as soon as I painted it, it was almost like a damn it kind of moment that I saw them painted and was like, okay, yeah, this seems a lot more lively in color, people are going to like that. And then as I foolishly kind of shared it, where I was like, what do you think about this? You know, people were like, oh, this is great, right? So as much as I love black and white stuff, and someday I've actually even toyed with, I just recently told the guy who does my website stuff, I was like, hey man, I want you to put up a spot for me to put up the black and white comic. And I was going to go back through and change some of the art, because you have to draw differently if you know it's going to be just in black and white versus if it's going to be
shading
in color. Yeah, exactly. Things that you would leave open so that I could put backgrounds in digitally and stuff like that in color. If I'm going to do it in black and white, I have to do it anyway. So I was going to go do that, but I'm so busy lately. Just the other day when we were about to launch, like put all the changes that we've done on my site, I was like, go ahead and pull that comic down, man. I'm not going to be able to do it soon. So I would love to do it in ink. That's my favorite part, and I've found someone who's going to moving forward going to color Beorn for me. He colored chapter 4 of this book.
Nice.
He's so much better than me, and he was great, because I had to tell him, like, okay, I would just tell you to do what you want, but I need it to be consistent with what I did for 1 through 3, right? So I'm almost like asking him to like dumb it down to my level. Like,
Gotcha.
And anyway, and so that would be my inking is definitely my favorite part. Like the drawing it is great. Drawing takes me a long time. Inking it, I feel like that's where I get to kind of cut loose. And I think part of that is because of those people, like everybody who were my biggest influences. Someone just asked for me. It was all because of their inking. Right?
Yeah.
Even the Franco-Belgian stuff, like every one of the guys that I love the most, it's because of how, not just how good they are at inking, but like how immersive they can make every single panel.
Yeah.
Like it's just different. Like, not, and I don't mean this to knock on anybody's style. I understand why things are different across different books, right? But I'll go pick up a book now, and I want to be inspired by the art. So for me, it's not just about the story. And I'll go to look, and there's no backgrounds, there's nothing. It's just a bunch of talking heads, and I get that. That's fine. But it means I'm probably not going to buy the book.
Yeah.
Whereas, I'll go hunt down. I'll go hunt down some book in French that I can't even read just to appreciate the art.
So you've also got available. We're talking about the inking. Sketchy Business, which is all ink, full color. So that's also available.
I also brought, since I forgot, because there's other artists that I wanted to show, but like the actual pages.
Nice.
So the lettering, because my lettering is good, but it's very much my lettering, so it's not consistent enough whenever I started, especially to hand letter. So I print out the lettering so that if someone gets a page, they get the full story on there. But I purposefully hunted down a font that bounced on its baseline, so it was messy enough like mine. And which was funny because when I showed it to Audie, and I was like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" She was like, "You're getting better." And I was like, "That's not me." I was like, "That's a digital font." And she was like, "Really? This looks like you're right."
Yeah.
And I was teaching something up in New York with some friends, and I was writing on the whiteboard, and one of the people who's a student but also loves the Beorn books, she went, "Oh, it's the Beorn lettering," and I was like, "Actually, it's not." So I picked something that was so close to what I could do, but it's consistent and better than me. Yeah.
So what upcoming releases do you have?
Yeah, man. So luckily Beorn has taken a long time to finish this first book, but Chapter 4 and the trade paperback and my hardcover from the Kickstarter will all come out. The hardcover might come out before, it might come out in December. Thank you so much. It might come out in December, but definitely by January. So why January? The trade paperback, Chapter 4 of the comic, and the hardcover with the first 4 chapters in it, all of those will be out in January. So we get to kick off the new year.
Nice. And then, what ways can people contact you?
Yeah.
Website?
So if they go to thelittlestviking.com, that'll link to my other social media. That'll link to my Patreon. That's where I post most of all of my process stuff and whatnot. Social media is kind of dying for most artists these days, so I'm trying to send people to the website, sign up for my newsletter, sign up for my Patreon, that kind of stuff. And that'll all link from the website.
And I'll put the link to the website in the description box below.
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for your time.
Man.
Have a wonderful show.
That was painless. I thought it was going to get.
No
I thought you were going to ask me about my mom and my dad.
No. All business. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.